Well, hello there. Do you like exciting stories? Oh, that's good. That's so good because I've got a story that I think you're going to love. See these books? These 7 books are called the Chronicles of Narnia. Now, Narnia is a make-believe town, that land that is discovered by some young people when they travel to visit this magic land, and I'll bet you can't guess what happened there. A lot of things, but I don't want to get ahead of myself and spoil the story, but can I tell you a few things about the story? There's talking animals, including, I don't know if you can see that, the huge lion. There's all sorts of traveling and exploring, sometimes by walking, sometimes on horseback, even on magnificent ships. There's sword fighting, see that? There's magic and danger and adventure and huge, huge important battles. And I should probably warn you that, well, sometimes it can get a little tense, but in a good way. Now, in case you're wondering, these books were written by a man named C.S. Lewis, who wrote them for his goddaughter, and then some of his friends found out about the books and they read them, then more people read them. Pretty soon there was so many people wanting to read them that they kept printing more and more books, and now there's enough for all of us to enjoy. And you know what? I read these books when I was a little boy, and I loved them, but then I grew up and became a man, and I had 3 sons, and I read the books to them, and they loved them. And now, well, now I'm excited to see who's going to enjoy them, and I'm excited to read them out loud to you. Maybe you're one of my grandchildren, or maybe you're just another friend who's joined us and wants to hear the stories. But whoever you are, please know that you are welcome to join me. And I really do think you're going to love these stories. So, enough chatting. Shall we begin? The first book is called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I'm going to lean that here so you can see the title while we're reading. And then I'm going to read from this book. So, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, dedicated to Lucy Barsfield. My dear Lucy, C.S. Lewis writes, I wrote this story for you, but when I began it, I had not realized that girls grow up quicker than books. As a result, you are already too old for fairy tales, and by the time it is printed and bound, you will be older still. But someday, you'll be old enough to start reading fairy tales again. You can then take it down and from some upper shelf, dust it off and tell me what you think of it. I'll probably be too deaf to hear it and maybe too old to understand a word you're saying, but I shall still be your affectionate godfather, C.S. Lewis. So chapter 1 is titled, Lucy Looks into a Wardrobe. Once there were 4 children whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. This story is about something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war because of the air raids. They were sent to the house of an old professor who lived in the heart of the country, 10 miles from the nearest railway station and 2 miles from the nearest post office. He had no wife, and he lived in a very large house with a housekeeper called Mrs. Macready and 3 servants. Now, their names were Ivy, Margaret, and Betty, but they don't really come into the story much. He himself was a very old man with shaggy white hair, which grew over most of his face as well as on his head. And they liked him almost at once, but on the first evening, when he came out to meet them at the front door, he was so odd-looking that Lucy, who is the youngest, was maybe a little bit afraid of him. And Edmund, who was the next youngest, just wanted to laugh and had to keep on pretending he was blowing his nose to hide his laughter. As soon as they had said goodnight to the professor and gone upstairs, on the first night they were there, the boys came into the girls' room and they all talked it over. Well, we've fallen on our feet, no mistake, said Peter. This is going to be perfectly splendid. That old chap will let us do anything we like. Well, I think he's an old dear, said Susan. Oh, come off it, said Edmund, who was tired and pretending not to be tired, and that always made him bad-tempered. Don't go on talking like that. Well, like what? Said Susan. And anyway, it's time you were in bed. You're trying to talk like mother, said Edmund. And who are you to say when I'm to go to bed? You go to bed yourself. Well, hadn't we all better go to bed, said Lucy. There's sure to be a row if we're heard talking up here. No, No, I don't think there will, said Peter. I tell you, this is the sort of house where no one's going to mind what we do. Anyway, they won't hear us. It's about 10 minutes walk from here down to that dining room, and any amount of stairs and hallways in between. What's that noise? Said Lucy suddenly. It was a far larger house than she'd been in before, and the thought of all those long passages and rows of doors leading into empty rooms was beginning to make her feel just a little bit creepy. It's only a bird, silly, said Edmund. It's an owl, said Peter. This is going to be a wonderful place for birds. I shall go to bed now. I say, let's go and explore tomorrow. You might find anything in a place like this. Did you see those mountains as we came along? And the woods. There might be eagles in there. There might be deer, male deer. We call them stags. There'll be hawks. Badgers, said Lucy. Maybe foxes, said Edmund. And rabbits, said Susan. But when next morning came, there was a steady rain falling so thick that when you looked out of the window, you could see neither the mountains, nor the woods, nor even the stream in the garden. Of course, it would be raining, said Edmund. They had just finished their breakfast with the professor and were now upstairs in the room he had set apart for them, a long, low room with 2 windows on either end of it. Oh, do stop grumbling, Ed, said Susan. 10 to 1 it'll clear up in an hour or so, and in the meantime, we're pretty well off. There's a radio here and lots of books. Not for me, said Peter. I'm going to explore this house. Everyone then agreed to that, and that was how the adventures began. It was the sort of house that, you never seemed to come to the end of it. And it was full of unexpected places. The first few doors they tried led only into spare bedrooms, as everyone had expected they would. But soon they came to a very long room full of pictures where they found a suit of armor. And after that, there was a room hung all with green, with a harp in one corner, and then came 3 steps down and 5 steps up, and then, a kind of a little upstairs hallway and a door that led out onto the balcony, and then a whole series of rooms that led into each other and were lined with books, most of them very old books, and some were bigger than a Bible that you'd have in a church. And shortly after that, they looked into a room that was quite empty except for one big wardrobe. A wardrobe is kind of like a closet. The sort of wardrobe that has a looking glass, a mirror in the door. There was nothing else in the room at all except a dead bluebottle fly on the windowsill. Nothing here, said Peter, and they all trooped out again. All except Lucy. She stayed behind because she thought it might be worthwhile trying the door of the wardrobe. Now, even though she almost was sure that it was going to be locked, to her surprise, it opened quite easily, and 2 mothballs dropped out. Looking inside, she saw several coats hanging up, mostly long fur coats. There was nothing Lucy liked so much as the smell and feel of fur. She immediately stepped into the wardrobe and got in among the coats and rubbed her face against them, leaving the door open, of course. She knows that it's very foolish to shut oneself into any wardrobe or closet. Soon she went further in and found that there was a second row of coats hanging up behind the first one. It was almost dark in there, and she kept her arms stretched out in front of her so as to not bump her face into the back of the wardrobe. She took another step further, then 2 or 3 steps. She always expected to feel the wood at the back of the closet, but she couldn't feel it. This must be a simply enormous wardrobe, thought Lucy, going still further in and pushing the soft folds of the coats aside to make room for herself. Then she noticed there was something crunching under her feet. I wonder, is that more mothballs? She thought it might be, so she stooped down to feel it with her hand, but instead of feeling the hard, smooth wood of the floor of the wardrobe, she felt something soft and powdery and extremely cold. This is very strange, she said, and went on a step or 2 further. The next moment she found that what she was rubbing against her face and hands was no longer soft fur, but something hard and rough and even kind of prickly. Why, it's just like the branches of trees, exclaimed Lucy, and then she saw a light ahead of her. Not a few inches ahead of her, but where the back of the wardrobe ought to be, but a long way off. Something cold and soft was falling on her, and a moment later she found that she was standing in the middle of a woods at nighttime, with snow under her feet and snowflakes falling through the air. Lucy felt just a little bit frightened, but she also felt very inquisitive. That means curious. And she was excited as well. She looked back over her shoulder, and there, between the dark tree trunks, she could still see the open doorway of the wardrobe, and she even caught a glimpse of the empty room from which she had set out from. She had, of course, left the door open. We remember that, for she knew it was very silly to shut oneself into a wardrobe. It seemed to be still daylight there. I can always get back if anything goes wrong, she thought. So Lucy began to walk forward, crunch, crunch, over the snow, and through the woods towards the other light. In about 10 minutes, she reached it and found it was a lamp post. A lamp post in the middle of the forest. As she stood looking at it, wondering why it was there in the middle of the woods and wondering what to do next, then she heard a pitter-patter. Sounded like feet coming towards her. And soon after that, a very, very strange person stepped out from among the trees into the light of the lamppost. He was only just a little taller than Lucy, and he carried over his head an umbrella. It was white with snow that had fallen on it. From the waist upwards, he was like a man. From here up, he was just like a man, mostly, but his legs were shaped like a goat's. And the hair on them was glossy black, and instead of feet, he had goat's hooves. He also had a tail, but Lucy didn't see that just at first because it was neatly caught up over one arm and the arm that held the umbrella, so as to keep it from trailing in the snow. He had a red woolen muffler or scarf around his neck, and his skin was rather reddish too. He had a strange but pleasant little face with a short, pointed beard and curly hair, and out of the hair there stuck two horns, one on each side of his forehead. One of his hands, as I have said, held the umbrella. In the other arm, he carried several large brown paper parcels. What with parcels and the snow, it looked just like, almost like he was doing Christmas shopping. He was a fawn, not a deer's baby, that kind of fawn. It was a different kind of fawn, F-A-U-N, and it's with a man's body and a goat's lower part. And when he saw Lucy, he gave such a start of surprise that he dropped all his parcels. "Goodness gracious me!" exclaimed the fawn. And that's the end of chapter 1. See, it's kind of fun so far, isn't it? And there's lots more exciting stuff to come. Okay, so come back for chapter 2. It's going to be called What Lucy Found There. But we'll do that tomorrow.